Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor 45 following episode 9, and I thought this was a mostly straightforward episode. Now, I will say up front that this twist was mostly bad, and I feel like it kind of limited the options here to where by the end of it, I felt like it was a very straightforward vote, and nothing too interesting really came out of it. Well, obviously, we'll be talking about that more in a moment. But there are 9 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 9, we have the boot from this week, and here we have Kendra. And I feel like this was a very straightforward vote. I kind of called this one last week, where obviously we got a lot of Kendra's personal content in the last episode, which I felt like was very much foreshadowing for this being her farewell. And obviously we get that here, where in this episode, they do try to shake it up, they try to make it clear that she was being targeted due to her targeting D. In turn, like, we try to see her try to flip the vote onto Jake, though considering that Jake is clearly being set up to be an underdog moving forward, it just didn't make sense for him to go out over Kendra here. And plus, once the actual votes were apparent by the actual twist, I just felt like it just made all the sense in the world for Kendra to be voted out here, as the Rebos would have the majority, and it didn't really make sense for them to really shake things up. And it didn't really make sense for Julie to force their hand in taking out Jake, especially when Kendra seemed to be a much bigger threat down the line. So I feel like for all those reasons, obviously Kendra's boot here was not too shocking at all, and it was even a unanimous vote. But if we are talking about her game in general, I thought it was mostly fine. Now, again, at the end of the day, it wasn't anything too exceptional, but obviously with her being out of the game now, there's not too much more to say, which is why she's here number 9.
And before we continue, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Russell Muscle TV, who I'm partnering up with this season to promote Idle Plays. Idle Plays is an online shop where you can purchase Survivor puzzles so you can practice them and be just like Carson from Survivor 44. We got all different selections here, including the fire puzzle, the snake to the top puzzle, the 5-piece puzzle that Spencer solved in 5 seconds from Survivor Cambodia, and more. If you want to take home Survivor puzzles made by superfans for superfans, feel free to click the link in the description and start shopping now.
And with that, there are 8 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how lucky I think they are to win based off their edit and current game position, and I actually did change some of the order here, particularly around the bottom half of the list, but at number 8, I actually decided to go with Julie. And like I said, the main pro with Julie's edit is that it's at least been consistent, and sure enough, she does get quite a bit of focus in this episode, where obviously she does talk about being annoyed by the actual twist, but then obviously later on, she's one of the main proponents of wanting this Jake plan to go through, where she does talk about how, like, she wants Jake gone over Kendra, and we see her kind of fighting for that to a degree, but then by the end of it, she just doesn't get her way, which I feel like that by itself is pretty bad. She obviously gets Austin's idol before the twist takes place, which obviously was a concerning case. Her group ended up being targeted there, though obviously that doesn't really amount to much here. Really, I feel like Julie's another one that I feel like has very little win equity at this point. She obviously is someone that very blatantly did not get her way here in a spot where they didn't really need to present it as such. And plus, you have the fact that she literally says in the episode that she doesn't see herself writing down D's name at all, and that she wants to go to the end with D, which I feel like will put her in a losing position in the future. So I feel like for all those reasons, I don't really have much faith in Julie moving forward. So I have her here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have another player that I am mostly low on at this point, and I feel like this episode was kind of bad for them, and here we have Austin. And I feel like at this point, it's really hard to justify putting Austin too high on this list, as I feel like all of his content up to this point has been very circumstantial. He obviously gets to his confessional talking about him now having 2 idols now that Kelly is left, which to a degree I anticipated, but I still hold as a knock against him that he didn't get to talk about it more within the episode itself. He obviously gets quite a bit of content on the actual journey, where obviously he does well at the challenge. He's the only one to actually complete the challenge and in turn earn his vote back. And obviously his strategy of lying about his vote to hide the fact that the Rebus have the numbers here. Again, all of it just feels very circumstantial at this point. And we even see like his one non-circumstantial conversation happening with Emily when she's talking about potentially flipping on D at some point, where he does talk about like how like he wants to ease Emily's fears so that he can keep working with her in the future, and that he's not really sure if he can blindside D at this point, which can be a bit of a pro in the sense that he's at least thinking about it. They're at least opening at the possibility that he could turn on her at some point. but still, I feel like more of the emphasis there is on Emily than anyone else. And plus, at this point, I feel like there are just less positives with Austin's edit. So I feel like for those reasons, I can't really have Austin too much higher here. So I have him here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have the person I had at the bottom of last week's ranking, and here we have Bruce. And this was definitely a weird episode for Bruce, where obviously he gets a lot of content here about his shock over the last tribal, him learning that Kelly wanted to target him despite her being one of his closest allies. And obviously, he really lays it on thick here. You can very much tell that affects him. He obviously gets his intro package here, which is a bit of a knock in the sense that it could lead to him being taken out soon, sort of similar to what I said last week about Kendra. But it is still kind of positive content. It's at least content that I can see being pivoted towards, like, Bruce turning his game around at this point. Now, yes, we do later see him win immunity here, which I feel like it could also be foreshadowing for as well. And there's obviously the big knock of the fact that his edit has been so negative for so much of the season, and also the fact that, like I said with Kendra, this could just be his setup for his eventual boot here, sort of a last-ditch effort to humanize him before he is eventually taken out. And some of it could also just be a journey edit too, where he talks about how, like, he is going to go home and he's going to talk with his daughter and his wife about whether he is as overbearing to them as he was on the island. So again, I don't really see it as much of a turning point here, but I do think it is more of a potential turning point than it was with Kendra. Whereas I feel like with Kendra, it was 1000% an indication that Drew was going home soon. With Bruce, I could see a minor scenario where it could be significant, but more than likely, I don't think it will, which is why I still have him here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and we have someone who just didn't really have much to do in this episode, and here we have Coutura. And honestly, I think the main reason I have her at least this high is I feel like she has less blatant negatives than the people we already talked about. But with that said, kind of going back to what I said at the beginning of the video about how this twist was bad, I feel like Coutura is one of these people that could have made this vote interesting had she actually had her vote, as she is one of the people on the bottom at this point. She just lost her closest ally, and I feel like if Emily really wanted to pivot this vote onto D, that Coutura would have been one of the votes that she would have needed to get here. But obviously with this twist and with Emily and Coutura losing their votes, that didn't really come into fruition here. Really, most of her content here is her just being annoyed by the fact that Bruce won immunity again, which again ties into her overall storyline. Again, I still stand by what I said last week, where the fact that they are continuing to focus so much on this rivalry when it's clearly taking up so much of the season makes me feel like that's all that's really building up to at this point. And with other people being on Bruce's case at this point, it's not even a case of Coutura eventually taking out Bruce and being like, I told you so. We know that other people think that Bruce is overbearing and stuff, and that he's probably not that big of a threat at the end of the day. So I feel like for all those reasons, I can't really have Coutura as much of a contender, and really the only reason she's above these other people is because her negatives are not as blatant as other people. Then also, she didn't really get much in this episode to drag her down even further, which is why she is here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and this person definitely had more of a cooldown episode here, though nothing too dramatic in my eyes. And here we have Drew, who obviously is coming off the back of claiming a lot of the credit for the Kelly move here. Even though I feel like there are definitely other people that could have gotten credit, I still thought that was worth mentioning. And Drew obviously doesn't get too much craziness here, where he does get a weird confessional early on, talking about how Bruce has been playing this imaginary game, and then now he has to either accept reality or reject it. And I find it kind of weird that Drew is the one narrating all that. You have obviously his strategy about him like wanting to flush Bruce's idol until Bruce wins immunity, and then obviously like he talks about like being back at camp while the other teens are elsewhere and that he can't really strategize much. And he is one of the people talking about voting out Kendra here over Jake. While he does like consider the idea of voting out Jake, I don't really feel like that was really much. That was sort of a last minute thing. And I feel like my view of Drew hasn't really changed much here. He got a lot of narration early on, and I still feel like he's probably not winning. I feel like he's probably like, again, like one of these big characters that's eventually going to be taken out. And I don't really see much of a case for that changing based on what we saw here, which is why he is here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and it is the same top 3 as last week. It's just a matter of ordering them. But number 3, we actually have the same person here as we did last week, and here we have Jake. And realistically, do I think Jake is winning at this point? I don't think it's likely. I think this episode just gave us more of the same, to where at this point, it wouldn't shock me if he is kind of like the Owen of the season. Like someone that does try to play the game a lot, someone that tries to like play from the bottom, but gets to the end in a spot where they don't really have much respect here. And we see that where they do get a lot of content about how like this is an opportunity for him to shake up the game, only for him to not really get much credit for the actual flip to happen here. Now, yes, it was a pretty consensus target here, but he was still on the chopping block. There was a chance he could have gone home here, but it really just feels like a lot of it feels like this infighting between the Rebas over what to do here. And again, the fact that Jake himself doesn't get much credit here, despite him being clearly propped up as a sympathetic underdog, just makes you think that he's going to be like another Owen, sort of like another Xander from 41 if we want another example here. But again, he is one of the more developed characters of the season in my eyes, which is why he is at least this high, though at this point my actual faith in him winning the game has actually gone down, which is why he is here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and obviously it is the same top 2 as last week. And while this person did get some good content here and there, I feel like the gap between number 2 and 1 is actually widened from what it was last week. But number 2, I did decide to go with Emily here, who obviously has a pretty big episode here, some of that being circumstantial with her losing her vote initially, going on the journey and getting a chance to earn it back, and then obviously losing her vote in that challenge here. And she actually comes off kind of sympathetically here, where she talks about how despite her being an investment analyst, that she's actually bad at mental math, and that we really see her feeling bad after losing the challenge, way more from her perspective than Coutura after losing the challenge on her side of things. And then even earlier in the episode, she is one of the people considering targeting D, where we see that conversation of her with Austin and Drew talking about contemplating potentially flipping on them at some point, though obviously that doesn't quite go her way there, where obviously they're more inclined to flush Bruce's idol first. In general, that group just coming off as more solid than anything else. So obviously that's not particularly great. And then later on, she is one of the bigger proponents of taking out Jake here, only for her to not get her way there. Though to be fair, she didn't have a vote anyway. So on the surface, it's not a great episode for her. She obviously does not get her way, either in getting Austin and Drew to flip on D, and then later on in getting them to flip on Jake over Kendra. But I still feel like this is going to be between Emily and D at this point, where everyone else just has massive holes in their edit to where I don't really see them winning. And I feel like Jake is someone that is more so being pegged to be a losing finalist at this point, which kind of leaves it as just this battle between Emily and D. And while there is still some positive content that can be gleaned from all this, I think for now, I think D is clearly out in front over Emily, which is why I had to leave her here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 45 right now is still D. And I feel like this was, on the whole, a very solid episode for D here, where obviously early on she does explain to Bruce why Kelly targeted him, with obviously her thinking that he was overbearing. That obviously kickstarts the whole thing with Bruce really reconsidering a lot of his game here. Obviously, we know that people like Kendra want to target her, though that doesn't really get followed up within this episode. But even so, it's still treated as serious enough of a threat to where D is the one taking the charge to get out Kendra here. She knows that Kendra is someone that would have gone after her, and obviously Kendra gets her way here over the likes of people like an Emily and a Julie that wanted to advocate for otherwise. And we also learn this episode as well that Julie wants to go to the end with D, which while we don't really hear much from D herself about all this, is still pretty good from a gain standpoint at least. Now I will say that it's not completely lock safe, as we also see in this episode Emily also wanting to target D at some point and even having that conversation with Austin and Drew about it. And we get that confessional from Austin implying that he's not entirely against the idea of voting out D at some point, but just not right now. So that is enough of a worry for me to where I can't say for sure that D will 100% win the game, but I still feel like this was a better episode for D than it was for Emily. And while there's still time for things to shift around, I feel like the fact that D got her way here, the fact that D was able to take out someone that was clearly coming for her, was enough to have her here at number 1. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can stay tuned for that. I am still covering Survivor UK as well as The Amazing Race 35, so you can expect weekly power rankings of those shows. I am on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And you can also join the Discord server by also clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that is the video. See ya.